We're going to pause a moment while we let the stream start. This is being live streamed to YouTube. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the Office of Tax Appeals, or OTA for short. My name is Andrew Wong and I am the lead administrative law judge who will be conducting the oral hearing for this case. On today's panel, in addition to myself, we have judges Josh Aldrich and Suzanne Brown. Also present is our stenographer, Ms. Lynn Alonzo. This hearing is being live streamed to the public, and a video recording will be made available on OTA's YouTube channel. Also, Ms. Alonzo will report this hearing verbatim and prepare an official hearing transcript, which will be made available on OTA's website. To help Ms. Alonzo make a clear record, please speak slowly, clearly, and directly into your microphones. Please do not speak over each other. Please answer verbally, and please mute your microphones when not speaking. If Ms. Alonzo cannot hear, understand, or identify someone who is speaking, she has permission to interrupt the oral hearing at any time to get clarification. I also would like to clarify that this oral hearing is before OTA, which is a separate agency from the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, or CDTFA. OTA is not a court, but an independent appeals body, and the office is staffed by tax experts and is independent of the state's tax agencies. I am the lead panel member for purposes of conducting this oral hearing. However, my co-panelists and I are co-equal decision makers and may ask questions of either party during the hearing. Further, our three-person panel will decide all the issues presented to us, and each of us will have an equal vote in making those decisions. All right, Ms. Alonzo, are we ready to go on the record? Okay, let's go on the record. This is the appeal of HM Carpet Inc. before the Office of Tax Appeals, OTA case number 240616486. Today is Tuesday, May 13th, 2025, and the time is 1:05 p.m. We are holding this hearing in Cerritos, California. I'm Andrew Wong, the lead panel member for this case, and with me on today's three-person panel are judges Josh Aldrich and Suzanne Brown. The individuals representing the appellant, the taxpayer, please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Manny Almeida. I am the representative for HM Carpet Inc. I am a tax representative.
Thank you. Could you please pull the microphone a little bit closer to you so
Sure.
it could be picked up?
Is that better?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. I believe so. Even though it's loud in the room, it might
Yeah.
not be on YouTube in YouTube land. So.
Want me to repeat the introduction? Or?
No, I think we're good. Thank you. And individuals representing the respondent tax agency, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, or CDTFA, could you please introduce yourselves for the record?
Kevin Smith from the CDTFA Legal Division.
Jarrett Noble, also from the Legal Division.
Jason Parker, Chief of Headquarters Operations Bureau.
Good afternoon. Thank you. All right. On March 25th, 2025 and April 3rd, 2025, OTA informed the parties that I and Judge Brown, respectively, would be joining this panel as substitutes for two other judges who had been previously identified to the parties, but subsequently became unavailable for this hearing. OTA gave the parties the option to file a written objection or to request recusal of the new judges for good cause within 15 days of those notices. However, OTA received no objections from either party, so Judge Brown, Judge Aldrich, and I will constitute the panel hearing and deciding this case. We are considering two issues today. Issue number one is whether the amount of unreported taxable purchases subject to use tax should be reduced. Issue number two is whether appellant was negligent. Mr. Almeida, does that sound like a correct recitation?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
thank
correct,
you.
Judge.
No, sorry. CDTFA, does that sound correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Let's talk about exhibits. Appellant has not identified or submitted any exhibits. And so, Mr. Almeida, you have no exhibits for today, is that correct?
Yeah, nothing for today.
Okay.
Everything has been submitted previously.
Okay. And CDTFA, you've identified and submitted proposed exhibits A through E as evidence. You had no other exhibits, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Almeida, you had no objections to those proposed exhibits, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. CDTFA's exhibits A through E will be admitted into the record as evidence. And as far as witnesses go, Mr. Almeida, you had no witnesses today,
That is correct.
and CDTFA, you have no witnesses today.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, it was anticipated that this hearing would take approximately 65 minutes. Mr. Almeida, you've asked for 30 minutes to be divided between your opening presentation and your rebuttal and closing. You can divide that however you want. And then CDTFA has asked for 20 minutes, and then we've budgeted 15 minutes for judges' questions and whatnot. Okay? Any questions from either party? Mr. Almeida?
Not at this time.
No.
Nope. All right. So you will proceed with your presentation, Mr. Almeida. You have 30 minutes.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much, Judge. Yeah, I mean, the reality is I'm very concerned about the fact that we actually are hearing this particular case today because, you know, in my 35-plus years of experience having to deal with the sales tax cases, this is the first one that I ever remember where we're actually addressing transactions involving resale certificates that were expired or no longer valid and resale certificates that were not properly signed by the authorized representative of my client, HM Carpet, Inc. And part of the reason is I think ultimately the auditor that went through and reviewed these resale certificates from the vendors decided that they had spent so much time going through this process of getting resale certificates that were expired or invalid, needed some sort of a backup to be able to present this audit. I mean, this is the first time I've ever seen, and again, I've got numerous cases involving sales tax, but it's the first time I've ever seen where the sales tax burden has not been given to the vendor or the seller or the retailer, whichever you want to call it. There's numerous vendors where the resale certificates were not valid. Either they weren't valid because the permit number had been closed out, or the actual signature on some of the resale certificates did not pertain to anyone that was working for my client. And in fact, we identified numerous resale certificates, and the department never gave us any leeway whatsoever in trying to address which ones are valid, which ones are not. They just basically said, our client was responsible because they submitted a resale certificate and their intent was to purchase items for resale, which ultimately they didn't because they're actually a lump sum contractor for the most part. They're, you know, basically buying flooring and carpeting and things like that. And apparently the tax was not paid by the vendors. Therefore, my client, HM Carpet, Inc., became responsible. But I have a case involving the opposite. So I'm trying to better understand how the law is being applied, because we can't have it both ways. I mean, either the vendor is responsible for a permit that's no longer valid, the seller's permit number has been closed out many, many years ago, or on a resale certificate that was filled in by whoever it was signed by someone who was not authorized. And again, it doesn't have to be an officer as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, but if you have multiple resale certificates and the signature of one person is basically, you know, something that you can't even identify as far as the signature, which is actually the legitimate signature, and then you have a printed signature from the same person, there should be a question mark as to whether both resale certificates should be accepted. As far as I'm concerned, one should be if it's determined that it's valid, the other one should not be. But nevertheless, if you've got old resale certificates where the permit has been closed out, if I'm auditing the retailer, I'm going to disallow those sales for resales on the retailer side. I'm not going to go back to the customer and say, oh, did you intend to? Because they didn't intend to do that at the time of the transaction, which was when there was a new seller's permit on file. And, you know, you can't give guidance to a client and say, okay, well, no, you don't have to worry about that as long as you didn't give a resale certificate. Having said that, I know the department generally will come back and say, well, the customer needs to make the vendor aware. But if the customer basically closes out their permit, that permit is long gone. That's why the CDTFA and previously the BOE allows you to go online and verify whether the number is accurate or not, or whether it's open or not. And none of that seemed to have occurred during this audit. It was just more, let's call the vendors, let's find out if they have a resale certificate on file. And if they didn't have a resale certificate, clearly they must have signed it internally because it wasn't the same signature as the customer originally signed. And again, if you've got two different names with two different signatures, well, one being a signature and one's just like a printed name where you can clearly read it, I think it should be questioned. And it was never questioned, and throughout the appeals process, we have contended that that should be the case, and nothing has changed. So again, it's important because as a representative, I never want to give somebody the opinion that, hey, you closed out your permit, your resale certificate is still valid. Well, in one particular case where I have an audit where the retailer is being assessed, the same thing happened. So which one is it? Is it the retailer's responsibility or is it the buyer's responsibility? When you have a closeout number or, a brand new corporation where it always requires a new number. And I can tell you, having done this long enough, one of the big issues that we always have is whether someone has incorporated and that. But for the most part, this is an audit based on resale certificates that were no longer valid. So penalties should not be assessed because nobody was, basically committed negligence.
Thank you, Mr. Almeida. Did you have anything else, or does that complete?
No,
your-
that's it. And again, I find it to be a very simple situation, but certainly not consistent with Regulation 1668 or the sales tax law in California.
Okay, thank you very much. You will have 23 minutes for your rebuttal and closing. All right, I will now turn to my co-panelists to see if they have any questions for Mr. Almeida, starting with Judge Brown.
Thank you. Mr. Almeida, you may recall that during the pre-hearing conference, although I was not there, I read the minutes and orders that Judge Wong issued, and he asked that both parties be prepared to address the Edward Spurlock Board Memorandum. I didn't hear you mention it in your presentation, so I want to ask, how does your argument comport with the Edward Spurlock Board Memorandum?
My argument is just based on my 30-plus years of experience. The retailer is generally responsible unless there's a particular reason or there's something that's been found within the records where clearly my client, as it stands today, provided these resale certificates knowing that they were closed out and, ultimately intended. I think the auditor referred to the fact that they intended to buy these products for resale, but if I'm new to the company and I don't issue a resale certificate, why should I be held, or why should my company be held responsible? It's a judgment call, but at the end of the day, you can't just say that all the resale certificates that are located with the vendors are valid. It just doesn't make any sense to me, and I've never had the experience of having a purchaser be responsible when there's closeout resale certificates on file with the vendors.
So you're saying that your client should be able to issue a resale certificate to the vendor and then claim that the resale certificate is not valid, and that means that your client should not owe the tax?
I didn't say that. I specifically addressed resale certificates that were issued way, way back before the new company was put in place and the new employees came into work. By no means did I ever say that. So no.
Well, I was referring to the Edward Spurlock Board Memorandum opinion that says that, hold on, I've got the wording, a buyer cannot issue a resale certificate to the seller and then deny the validity of the resale certificate because it failed to include all the elements of a valid resale certificate.
No, the reason these resale certificates are not valid is because the sales tax permit has been closed. way back, way before this particular taxpayer under this new structure was involved. It has nothing to do with issuing a resale certificate and then saying it wasn't my intention. They were never involved. Whoever issued the resale certificate back then doesn't know what's going on today.
So you're saying that your client didn't provide the resale certificate to these resale certificates to the vendors?
Well, I wasn't there, but I'm assuming if the sales tax permit is closed, at some point those resale certificates become invalid, and that's what I'm stating. At the time of this particular audit, those resale certificates were stale. They were no longer valid. The permit had been closed years before, and at that point in time, that's why you're able to go on the CDTFA or BOE website and verify that those permits are open or closed.
I'll say I have nothing further right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Aldrich, do you have any questions for Mr. Almeida?
I do not, thank you.
Okay. I just had one question about the purchases at issue. So you're not disputing that your client made these purchases, is that correct?
Absolutely not.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. That's all the questions I had for now. Now we will turn it over to CDTFA for their presentation. You have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. At issue today is whether an adjustment should be made to the amount of appellant's unreported purchases subject to use tax. Appellant is a construction contractor that furnishes and installs flooring materials. As relevant to this appeal for the liability period, appellant filed sales and use tax returns in which it reported taxable sales of approximately $5 million. Appellant did not report any purchases subject to use tax for the liability period. Appellant's accounts payable journal recorded taxable purchases of materials of approximately $25 million. The department allowed reductions totaling approximately $16.2 million, resulting in unreported purchases subject to use tax of approximately $8.8 million for the liability period. California imposes sales tax on a retailer's retail sales in the state of tangible personal property, measured by the retailer's gross receipts, unless the sale is specifically exempt or excluded from taxation by statute. All of a retailer's gross receipts are presumed subject to tax, unless the retailer can prove otherwise. The burden of proving that a sale of tangible personal property is not a sale at retail is upon the person who makes the sale, unless the seller takes from the purchaser a resale certificate. The certificate relieves the seller from liability for sales tax only if taken in good faith from a person who is engaged in the business of selling tangible personal property and who holds the California seller's permit. Use tax is imposed on the storage, use, or other consumption of tangible personal property purchased from any retailer for storage, use, or other consumption in this state, measured by the sales price. Use means the exercise of any right or power over tangible personal property, incident to the ownership of that property. If a person who timely issues to the seller a valid resale certificate makes any storage or use of the property, other than retention, demonstration, or display, while holding such property for sale in the regular course of business, the storage or use is taxable at the time the property is first stored or used. It is presumed that tangible personal property sold by any person for delivery in this state is sold for storage, use, or other consumption in this state until the contrary is established. And that tangible personal property shipped or brought to the state by the purchaser was purchased for storage, use, or other consumption in this state until the contrary is established. A person who stores, uses, or otherwise consumes tangible personal property in this state is liable for the tax, A person's liability for the use tax is not extinguished until the tax has been paid to the state, unless the person can produce a receipt from a retailer engaged in business in the state or otherwise authorized to collect the tax. In general, construction contractors, like appellant, are consumers of the materials they furnish and install, and either sales or use tax applies with respect to the sale of materials or the use of materials by the construction contractor. Appellant is incorrect in its assertion that its vendors should be solely liable for tax because they did not exercise due diligence in accepting invalid resale certificates from appellant. First, we note that any lack of due diligence on the part of the vendor is also attributable to appellant because it was the person that included invalid or incomplete information on the resale certificates it issued to its vendors. Next, when appellant's entity type changed and it continued to purchase supplies without paying tax on the invoices, appellant never corrected the information or notified its vendors that the entity had changed. It is appellant's obligation to notify the vendors that it is purchasing materials from without paying tax that the entity has changed. This principle is also discussed in annotation 475.0175. Next, appellant induced its vendors into thinking the sales were for resales. It would be improper to allow appellant to escape liability for supplies it consumed on the basis that the resale certificates it issued were invalid. That's Revenue and Taxation Code, Section 6244, Subdivision A. This is identical to the situation in the Board Memorandum Opinion of Edward Spurlock, in which the Board held that a buyer cannot issue a resale certificate to a seller and then deny the validity of the resale certificate because the certificate failed to include all the elements required for a valid resale certificate. Thus, appellant is liable for use tax on its sales for which it issued invalid resale certificates and then failed to remit tax on its use of property in construction contracts in this state. Next, the appellant continues to assert it is being held liable for tax on purchases where it did not issue a resale certificate to its vendors. Appellant has not identified any specific transactions where this occurred. Next, to the extent appellant asserts that it thinks some of the resale certificates may have been forged, we note that no other evidence has been provided, such as police reports, establishing that there was any forgery. In addition, no context has been provided, and it is unclear why someone would forge a signature on a resale certificate so that appellant could purchase materials without tax. Regardless, appellant is liable for the materials it consumed without paying tax at the time of purchase under Section 6244. Finally, the negligence penalty was properly imposed because this was appellant's second audit and made the same errors found in the first audit. In addition, it made its reporting error of 175%. This indicates that appellant could not have had a good faith and reasonable belief its reporting was substantially in compliance. Thus, the negligence penalty was properly imposed. Thus, no adjustments were warranted to appellant's liability for unreported use tax or the negligence penalty. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, CDTFA. I'll now turn to my co-panelists to see if they have any questions for CDTFA, beginning with Judge Brown.
I don't think I have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Judge Aldrich?
I do not have any questions either. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any questions at this time either. So we will turn it back over to Mr. Almeida for your rebuttal and
Okay.
closing. And you have 23 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think there's a number of things stated that clearly I don't know for a fact, and it's really based on speculation, in my opinion. I mean, induced the vendor to not charge him tax. Again, the resale certificates that were provided at the time that they were actually provided, I can understand that being an issue. However, we're talking about resale certificates that were provided at the time that that permit was open, not at the time that the audit was being performed on the new permit. And the mere fact that the statement, and I know this has been going on throughout the appeals process, that the client, HM Carpet Inc., intended for those transactions that occurred after the closing, that they were intended to be purchased for resale, that once again is speculation. I can tell you this, the audit probably took so much longer than necessary. And again, I don't know who represented the client at the time, but I can see the guidance not occurring. And that's one of the issues that I have with the way the CDTFA works today and the way that some of the cases are being approached. You make a decision as to somebody owing the tax, but in a situation where maybe you're suggesting that entry fees are taxable in a particular case that I have, but there's no guidance being given to the taxpayer, that puts them at a disadvantage. So the fact that there was resale certificates on file that at one time were valid, and again, this is where it differs from the Spurlock case, is because the client did not issue closed out permit resale certificates at the time that these transactions that are questioned in the audit or actually assessed in the audit were a factor. In addition to that, vendors can do just the same as anybody else after the fact of the transaction, which means, okay, they get a call from an auditor, they panic, now they're in a position where, oh, we don't have a resale certificate from that particular vendor or customer. Let's get their permit number and let's put it on the resale certificate and let's just sign it. And that's what we believe occurred in a number of these resale certificates where the signature of one of the corporate officers did not match the signature from, let's say, the power of attorney or the waiver of limitation that was signed at the time that I was representing them. So that doesn't necessarily, that's just speculation. It doesn't necessarily give me anything concrete. In addition to that, police report. Well, doing a police report in a case where the CDTFA is basically saying that these resale certificates are valid, at no point in time during the audit process did somebody come to us and say, okay, if you can get a police report that suggests or that can prove that the signature is invalid, then that'll be proof. At the end of the day, all I did was I used the signature on the power of attorney and the waiver of limitation and compared it to the resale certificates that we had. Simple as that, because we know that the signature on the POA and the waiver are going to be the typical signature from that particular person. So that's how we compared it. But no, at no point in time have we done that. Have we ever done? I didn't even know you could actually request a police report if you felt that the resale certificates were being questioned simply because of the signatures that does not match. But it's not uncommon, and that's why generally, and I think the department stated it, resale certificates generally are required a good faith agreement between the purchaser and the seller. If we didn't issue a timely resale certificate with the proper permit number, then there is no agreement between the buyer and the seller should do their due diligence and verify that that permit has been closed out and then there's a new one open. Every audit, again, I repeat, every audit I've ever been involved with, where the retailer is being questioned, that's the fallback. hey, did you verify online? That's why we give you the opportunity to do that. Is the date correct? Is the signature the appropriate person? Do you have a profile on the client that has a signature? Because generally you're going to have a credit report or you're going to have some credit information that's going to have a copy of that signature. But at the end of the day, I don't know if the vendors basically asked the client, my client, for their permit number, but again, they had the old one. They didn't have the new one. If you have the new one, that might be a different scenario that we would, probably wouldn't be here for that. But we're talking about an old permit number that had been closed, several years back. So, in my opinion, the points that the department made are not valid, and it's only speculative.
Does that conclude your closing remarks, Mr. Almeida?
Yes,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
All right, for one final time, I will turn to my co-panelists to see if they have any questions for either party, starting with Judge Brown.
No questions, thank you.
Judge Aldrich.
I do have a couple of questions. The first is for our appellant. There's no dispute, to follow up on Judge Wong's question earlier, there's no dispute that the purchases were ex-tax, is that correct?
Based on my knowledge, and again, I didn't do the detailed review, but based on the sampling that we did, that is correct.
Thank you. And for the department made reference to, or CDTFA made reference to the prior audits. In what ways was the prior audit similar to the audit at issue?
The prior audit was also based on a materials accountability test. So they looked at purchases and ex-tax purchases and came up with an assessment in that audit as well. So it's a similar in this situation that they had some resale certificates in the prior audit, similar vendors that were in this audit as well that were found to be subject to use tax.
Okay, and so there was a issue, was there the issue raised regarding the validity of the resale certificates in the prior audit?
Based on some quick analysis, it looked like there were some questioned resale certificates or resale certificates that may not have been issued. There were some adjustments for vendors where where we didn't have a resale certificate for those vendors. They made that in the material accountability test.
And just to make sure I'm looking at the correct things, in Exhibit E, there's two files, so it's a multi-file PDF and Excel. There's a document labeled Exhibit A, prior audit, and Exhibit B, prior audit. Are those the things that you were referencing?
Yes, they are.
Okay. All right. And does the department see any distinguishment between negligence and intentional disregard with respect to the negligence penalty?
I'm not sure the context of your question.
Right.
I'm not sure.
So Revenue and Taxation Code Section 6484 provides that if any part of a deficiency for which a deficiency determination is made is due to negligence or intentional disregard of the law, is it accurate that the department is only arguing that negligence occurred in this particular appeal?
No, I think it'd be proper to say the department thinks that a 10% penalty is warranted in this appeal. There are elements of negligence in reporting, but there are also obvious elements of intentional disregard with law by issuing invalid resale certificates.
Okay.
We just think the evidence amounts to a 10% penalty.
And I was going to say, and also not informing its vendors that it changed the entity type.
Thank you. I'm going to refer it back to Judge Wong.
Thank you. I had one question for Oh, CDTFA. I noticed that there were some excerpts from, I guess, the audit working papers from that prior audit you referenced, but the whole, they're just excerpts. There are no full audit working papers. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that the record is complete.
That's my understanding, is that this current audit included certain parts that were relevant to this audit, which included the material accountability test and the reporting of gross sales from the prior audit as well, to compare the two audits.
Okay. Got it. Do you happen to know what the measure was with regards to that audit item in the previous audit that is similar, that is allegedly similar to the audit item at issue here, purchases subject to use tax?
I can double check, but the Exhibit B has just over $12 million in measure of unreported ex-tax purchases of materials in the material accountability test.
Okay. And the issue with that is similar to the issue here? Is it just resale certificates that were invalid, or?
The issue is that the measures are unreported purchases subject to use tax, and we're seeing a similar issue this audit around.
Okay. All right. One last question for Mr. Almeida. Could you address that there was a previous audit of your client with a similar issue, purchases that are subject to use tax that were not reported?
That's correct, but I want to clarify one thing. The audit that is in question here today, those resale certificates that we are asking to be removed from the audit were actually based on previous issuance, not during the audit period, not at that time. So those resale certificates, the client didn't just issue resale certificates today and backdate it to 10, 15 years back. That's not the case. So at no point in time during my audit period, there may have been some resale certificate, but the ones that we're referring to, the bulk of them, the majority, those were old resale certificates issued by someone else at that time, not during this audit. I'm not as familiar with the prior audit, but my understanding is that similar issues did occur. And my concern, my biggest concern going into this audit, and part of the reason I believe the negligence penalty or the 10% penalty is not applicable, is because under any condition where you have a prior audit and the situation hasn't been resolved and there hasn't been guidance given, this can happen. Because the audit takes so long, you can't really, honestly, you can't make changes until the decision's been made. And I can honestly say that it seemed to me like when I got involved that the clients seemed to be somewhat uneducated when it comes to understanding what the resale certificate does when it comes to having lump sum contracts for a construction contractor. And I can tell you I do a lot of work in that area, that industry, and that is confusing because they think they're reselling it. So they issue the resale certificate. The question then becomes, okay, did they have knowledge that they were supposed to put those particular items on line 2, those purchases, and pay the use tax? And that is one of the more complex and misunderstood portions of the California sales and use tax laws when it comes to, are you a time and material contractor or are you a lump sum contractor and you're the consumer? And that's, at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to, in my opinion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Almeida.
Thank you.
I noted the questions for the parties. All right. So this will conclude the hearing. The record is closed and the case is submitted today. The panel will meet and decide the case based on the exhibits presented and admitted as evidence. We will send both parties our written decision no later than 100 days from today. The oral hearing in this case is now adjourned. Hearings will resume tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. And thank you to both parties for your time and presentations. Off the record, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.